What if I told you that the most famous unsolved murder in America wasn't unsolved at all? What if the people who knew the truth were silenced, threatened, or simply ignored? And what if the real killer has been hiding in plain sight for 28 years? On Christmas morning 1996, a frantic 911 call shattered the illusion of the perfect American family. But the shocking truth wasn't the murder itself. It was what happened next. 3 detectives resigned in protest. A housekeeper feared for her life. And one investigator was so terrified of what she discovered, she counted the bullets in her gun while standing in the same room as the prime suspects. Before we dive into this rabbit hole of deception, lies, and cover-ups, I need to ask you something. If you're about to spend the next hour learning the truth that powerful people tried to bury, isn't it worth hitting that subscribe button? Seriously, 98% of you won't subscribe, but you'll watch this entire investigation. Can you at least tell me why in the comments? Now, let's uncover what really happened to 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey. December 25, 1996. Boulder, Colorado. The Ramsey house stood like a Christmas card photograph against the Colorado snow. Inside, wrapping paper scattered across marble floors told the story of another perfect holiday. John Ramsey, successful businessman. Patsy Ramsey, former beauty queen turned devoted mother. And their crown jewel, 6-year-old JonBenét, a blonde-haired beauty queen in her own right. But perfection, as we'll discover, was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26th, Patsy's voice cracked through the emergency dispatcher's headset. "We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please." Her daughter was gone. A ransom note demanded $118,000, the exact amount of John's Christmas bonus. The note was unlike anything investigators had ever seen. 3 pages long, dramatic, almost theatrical. "Listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction," it began. But here's what's chilling. The note was written with a pen and paper from inside the Ramsey house. Who breaks into a home, kidnaps a child, then sits down for 20 minutes to write a manifesto using the family's own supplies. As police flooded the house, friends gathered to comfort the family. But something felt wrong. Detective Linda Arndt watched John and Patsy carefully. Where was the frantic searching? The desperate pleading with kidnappers? Instead, she observed an eerie calm, whispered conversations, strategic phone calls. Then, at 1:05 p.m., John Ramsey did something that changed everything. Without being asked, he went down to the basement. Within minutes, his voice echoed up the stairs. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" He emerged carrying JonBenét's lifeless body. But here's what Detective Art noticed that the media missed. John walked directly to where his daughter lay hidden in the wine cellar. No searching. No hesitation. As if he already knew exactly where to look. The scene that followed was unlike anything in criminal investigation history. Instead of preserving evidence, John carried the body upstairs and placed it under the Christmas tree. The crime scene was obliterated. Any remaining forensic evidence was contaminated beyond use. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Detective Arndt later revealed that in that moment, as she knelt beside JonBenét's body, John leaned across from her. Their faces were inches apart. And in that silent exchange, something passed between them that she'll never forget. "I wore a shoulder holster," Arndt recalled years later. "And I consciously counted, I've got 18 bullets. A seasoned detective, alone in a house full of people, felt she needed to count her ammunition. Not because she feared some unknown intruder, but because of what she saw in the eyes of the grieving father kneeling across from her. What could drive a detective to such fear? What did she see that made her question everything about this perfect family? And why, when she tried to speak up, was she silenced? The answers lie in the testimonies of those who knew the Ramseys best, the people who lived inside their world, who saw behind the carefully constructed facade. People whose lives were destroyed for telling the truth. If you're starting to see that this case isn't what you thought it was, you're not alone. But we're just getting started. And honestly, if you're this invested already, why haven't you subscribed? 98% of viewers won't, but they'll watch until the end. Don't be part of that statistic. hit subscribe, and let's continue uncovering the truth together. Linda Wilcox thought she was just taking a housekeeping job. What she discovered inside the Ramsey home would haunt her forever. From March 1993 to September 1995, Wilcox worked as a housekeeper for the family, giving her unprecedented access to their private lives. What she witnessed there painted a disturbing picture that shattered the public image of America's most perfect family. "I was like furniture," Wilcox later explained. "They talked and acted like I wasn't even there." The first shock came from observing John and Patsy's relationship. This wasn't a marriage, it was a business arrangement. Wilcox described their interactions as amicable ex-spouses, rather than loving partners. The bed sheets told their own story. There were no signs of intimacy, no evidence they even shared the same bed regularly. John Ramsey wasn't the warm patriarch the media portrayed. He was cold, controlling, obsessed with quiet and order. Wilcox recalled a chilling incident from summer 1995 when John simply walked over and turned off her vacuum cleaner while she was cleaning. No words, just a look of pure irritation and the clear message: his need for control trumped everything else. But it was Patsy who truly disturbed Wilcox. This wasn't maternal love, it was obsession with image and perfection. JonBenét received little affection from her parents until she began winning beauty pageants. Suddenly, she became Patsy's project. The last time Wilcox saw JonBenét alive, the 4-year-old was preparing for a photo shoot, trailing pageant dresses and accessories behind her, excitedly gathering her costumes. The image of that little girl, lost in a world of adult expectations and manufactured beauty, would become Wilcox's final memory of her. Meanwhile, Burke lived in his own world, constantly having sleepovers that JonBenét could never reciprocate. Wilcox witnessed his jealousy when attention shifted to his sister, particularly when JonBenét wore a $90 custom-made Easter dress that later appeared in a Walmart display. Patsy and her mother were indignant. Their exclusive creation had been mass-produced. It was never about the child, it was about the image. But the most disturbing revelation came during Halloween 1994. 4-year-old JonBenét described herself as a good, sexy witch. A 4-year-old using the word sexy to describe herself. And Patsy echoed this language, calling her daughter inappropriate names that no mother should use for a young child. The pressure on JonBenét was relentless. When she got chickenpox in 1995, Patsy's primary concern wasn't her daughter's health. It was clearing the facial spots for an upcoming photo shoot. While on the phone with the doctor, Patsy was more worried about the pageant schedule than her child's well-being. This was the environment JonBenét lived in every day. Not love, not warmth, not childhood innocence, but performance, pressure, and the constant demand to be perfect for public consumption. John, meanwhile, was so detached from his children's daily care that he couldn't even dress JonBenét without help, struggling to find matching clothes and relying heavily on the nanny for basic parental tasks. One persistent myth Wilcox helped debunk was that bedwetting could have been a motive for murder. Both JonBenét and Burke wet the bed during her time there, with JonBenét's issue actually getting worse as she got older, contrary to normal development. John had asked Wilcox to change JonBenét's sheets because she wet the bed again, directly contradicting his later public claims of being unaware of the issue. But here's what's crucial. Wilcox emphasized that neither parent seemed particularly bothered by the bedwetting. They simply used pull-ups and changed sheets when necessary. The idea that this normal childhood issue could drive someone to murder was, in her words, an oversimplification that ignored the broader context of the family's pressures and dysfunction.
What was that broader context?
A household where love was conditional, where a 6-year-old's worth was measured in trophies and photographs, where control and image mattered more than genuine emotion. We're only scratching the surface of what Wilcox witnessed. But before we go deeper into this psychological maze, I have to ask, if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, why not subscribe? 98% of you are watching but won't hit that button. Help me understand why in the comments. Now, let's see what else this housekeeper discovered that made her question everything about this family. The more Linda Wilcox observed, the more she realized she wasn't working for a normal family. She was witnessing something far more sinister, a household built on secrets, control, and a disturbing obsession with appearances. The Ramsey home itself told a story. Wilcox discovered a floor safe in the wine cellar, the same damp and used room where JonBenét's body would later be found. Even Patsy didn't know about the safe, suggesting that even within the family, there were hidden spaces and secret compartments unknown to its residents. John's behavior was consistently strange. He kept a photo collage of his deceased daughter Beth in his bathroom, initially tucked between the tub and the wall. After a flooding incident damaged the house, he hung it up properly. But why keep such a personal memorial in such an odd location? What kind of man hides pictures of his dead child? That flooding incident in November 1995 revealed more about John's character. A painter had left a window open, causing wind to turn on a hot water faucet, resulting in $2,000 worth of damage. When John and Patsy returned home, John's first reaction was to remove his shoes. He never wore them in the house, then express controlled anger, threatening to fire the painter. Wilcox noticed something crucial in that moment, the subtle change in his eyes that betrayed his anger. This was a man who masked his emotions, who maintained control even when furious. The same controlled demeanor he would display months later when his daughter's body was discovered. Even the family pets told a disturbing story. They had a dog named Jacques that was poorly house-trained and often confined to specific areas. But here's the twisted part. When the original Jacques got sick, Patsy secretly replaced it with another dog, trying to keep the swap hidden. When the dog became inconvenient during their busy pageant schedule, they simply gave it away to neighbors. This pattern of prioritizing convenience over genuine attachment extended to JonBenét herself. According to Wilcox, JonBenét received little affection until she began performing in pageants, suggesting that love in the Ramsey household was conditional, tied to a child's ability to fulfill Patsy's vision of perfection. But Wilcox witnessed something even more telling about the family dynamics. She described JonBenét as a radiant, joyful child, the ray of sunshine in an otherwise subdued home. This little girl's natural vibrancy stood out against a backdrop of emotional detachment and impossibly high expectations. Burke, meanwhile, existed in his own world, centered around friends and sleepovers. But Wilcox noticed his envy when JonBenét received attention for her appearance. The $90 Easter dress incident wasn't just about exclusivity. It revealed the constant comparison and competition between the children, with JonBenét increasingly becoming the favorite as Patsy's focus shifted from Burke to her daughter. The most chilling aspect of Wilcox's observations was how normal this all seemed to the family. The emotional distance, the conditional love, the obsession with image, this was their everyday reality. JonBenét was growing up in a world where her worth was measured by her ability to perform, to be beautiful, to win competitions. At 4 years old, she was already trailing pageant dresses behind her, excited about photo shoots, describing herself with adult language that no child should know. She was being groomed not for happiness, but for public consumption. Wilcox's overall impression was of a household where genuine emotion was rare, where control trumped spontaneity, where image mattered more than reality. This wasn't the warm, loving family the public saw. This was a carefully orchestrated performance with a 6-year-old girl at its center. When Wilcox left her job in September 1995, she walked away from what she described as demanding hours and inadequate pay. But she also walked away from something else, a growing sense that something terrible was building in that house. 3 months later, JonBenét was dead. The pattern is becoming clear, isn't it? But Linda Wilcox wasn't the only employee who witnessed disturbing behavior. Another worker, someone with access to the outside of the house, would soon find himself dragged into this nightmare. And here's my question for you. If you're this deep into this investigation, learning things the mainstream media never told you, don't you think it's worth subscribing? Seriously, 98% of you won't. Comment below and tell me why. Now, let's meet the man who maintained their perfect exterior while chaos brewed inside. Brian Scott never imagined that maintaining the Ramsey family's picture-perfect landscaping would make him a murder suspect. But in the twisted world of this case, Everyone who got too close to the truth became a target. Scott was a University of Colorado graduate who worked as the Ramsey family's landscaper starting in 1995. His job was simple: maintain the exterior perfection that matched the family's carefully crafted image. He dug holes for Christmas decorations, repaired sprinkler systems, and kept their yard looking immaculate. His access to the house was limited: one trip to the basement to fix a sprinkler timer and occasional work around the exterior. He never entered the wine cellar where JonBenét's body was found, and was unaware of its existence. The only broken window he remembered was a small one at the front of the house, used to thread Christmas light cords through, far too small for anyone to use as an entry point. The last time Scott saw JonBenét alive, she was wearing blue overalls and climbing into the family's green Chevy Suburban. Even then, her behavior stood out. She was bossy, issuing commands to others. "You get in the back, you do this." For a 6-year-old, she displayed an unusual need for control, perhaps mirroring what she witnessed at home. But it was Scott's interaction with Patsy that provided the most revealing insight into her character. On October 3, 1995, the day O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murdering his ex-wife and her boyfriend, Patsy stormed out of the house, visibly upset. "He's getting away with murder," she declared, criticizing the justice system as bad and full of flaws. Scott noted her intense frustration, which she attributed to Simpson's wealth securing his acquittal. The irony is chilling. Less than 15 months later, Patsy herself would be accused of getting away with murder, potentially using her own family's wealth and influence to escape justice. Scott had no idea he was being investigated until Detective Linda Arndt requested samples of his handwriting, blood, saliva, and hair. This request came as a complete shock. He suddenly realized he was considered a suspect in the murder of a child he'd barely interacted with. When Detective Jane Harmer took over the case, she showed Scott 2 photographs from the crime scene: a bushel basket containing weeds and the window grate near the patio. Scott observed that the ground cover around the grate appeared disturbed, suggesting it might have been lifted sometime between September and December 1996. But here's what's crucial: Scott couldn't pinpoint when this disturbance occurred. It could have been from John's claimed break-in during the summer, or it could have been much more recent. The timing remained frustratingly vague. Scott's alibi for Christmas night was partially corroborated, but contained a critical gap. He was at his girlfriend's house until approximately 12:30 a.m., then returned home alone. No one could account for his whereabouts after 12:30 a.m., a gap that led to his inclusion on a list of 20 potential suspects compiled by Patsy's mother. This incomplete alibi, combined with his role as a regular worker at the Ramsey home, made him a convenient target for suspicion. But Scott's testimony actually undermined the intruder theory more than it supported it. He repeatedly stated that he never noticed anything unusual about the basement grate or window. His observation of disturbed ground in the crime scene photographs was speculative. He couldn't confirm when or how it occurred. The basket of weeds near the grate added intrigue, but Scott's unfamiliarity with the basement's layout limited his ability to provide conclusive insights. Most importantly, Scott's testimony suggested that any external intrusion would have been difficult to execute without leaving more obvious signs. Someone familiar with the property's layout, someone who knew about the basement window, the wine cellar, the house's quirks and hiding places, would have a significant advantage over an outsider. The police's focus on Scott revealed something disturbing about the investigation's direction. Instead of following evidence that pointed toward the family, they were desperately seeking alternative suspects. Anyone with access to the house became a person of interest, regardless of how tenuous their connection to the crime actually was. Scott's experience shows how the investigation was designed to look outward rather than inward. Landscapers, housekeepers, delivery people, anyone who could potentially be blamed instead of the family members who had the most access, the most knowledge, and the most opportunity. Scott's story reveals how far investigators went to avoid the obvious suspects. But there was another employee, someone with even more intimate access to the family's secrets, who would face much worse than mere suspicion. Her story will chill you to the bone. But first, seriously, we're deep into this investigation and you're still not subscribed? What's it going to take? Comment below and tell me why you won't hit that button. At least let me know you're here with me on this journey. Linda Hoffman-Pugh had no idea that working as the Ramsey family housekeeper would make her the target of a murder investigation and destroy her life forever. Having worked for the family for approximately 14 months leading up to JonBenét's murder, Linda held a key to the Ramsey residence and was intimately familiar with their home, routines, and personal dynamics. This insider access would make her one of the most scrutinized figures in the early investigation. Linda lived in Fort Lupton, Colorado, with her husband Mervyn and their 13-year-old daughter Ariana, who had occasionally played with JonBenét, including at a Christmas party on December 23, 1996, just 3 days before the murder. But it was Linda's financial struggles that first put her on investigators' radar. According to Patsy Ramsey, Linda tearfully requested a $2,500 loan just days before Christmas, claiming her sister, who was also her landlord, had threatened eviction. Patsy agreed to leave a check for Linda while the family was supposed to be away in Michigan for the holidays. However, Linda later denied this version of events, calling Patsy's account false and insisting her sister had never threatened eviction. This contradiction became a crucial point of contention that would follow Linda for years. On the night JonBenét's body was discovered, Boulder police visited Linda's home to question her, her husband, and Ariana. They collected handwriting samples, fingerprints, and hair for analysis. The police interest intensified when they learned Linda had requested December 24th off, the day before the murder. Then came the discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Investigators found duct tape at Linda's home that matched the brand used to bind JonBenét. While this wasn't conclusive evidence, the tape was commonly available. It added another layer of suspicion. Linda's intimate familiarity with the Ramsey home made her a natural person of interest. She knew the layout, the hiding places, the family's routines. Some theorists suggested she might have known about John Ramsey's $118,000 Christmas bonus, the exact amount referenced in the ransom note. But perhaps most damning was a comment Linda had made to Patsy's mother about JonBenét's beauty. She had remarked that JonBenét was so beautiful the family should be concerned about kidnapping. When Patsy later shared this comment with police, it cast Linda in an even more suspicious light. Despite all these factors pointing toward Linda, no physical evidence directly linked her to the crime. Her daughter Ariana was cleared as a suspect after a DNA test in January 1999. In January 1999, Linda testified for 8 hours before a Boulder County grand jury. What she revealed there would shake the investigation to its core and provide the most chilling theory about what really happened that Christmas night. Linda told the grand jury that their focus was primarily on Patsy Ramsey. They delved into details about Patsy's behavior, her relationship with JonBenét, even mundane things like Patsy's purchase of underwear for JonBenét at Bloomingdale's. Linda described Patsy's demeanor in the days leading up to Christmas 1996 as erratic, shifting from cheerful to irritable, having disputes with JonBenét over minor issues like clothing choices or inviting friends over. But then Linda shared her most terrifying theory. I think that maybe Patsy had multiple personalities. She became convinced that Patsy was suffering from some form of dissociative disorder and, in a moment of uncontrolled rage, might have accidentally harmed JonBenét. I saw that in her one day, and I think she may have gotten upset with JonBenét for some reason, and she may have hit her and not meant to hurt her. I don't think she meant to hurt JonBenét. I think it was an accident, and then it just continued from there. According to Linda's theory, what started as an accidental injury spiraled out of control. Patsy, realizing what had happened, authored the ransom note to mislead authorities, with John assisting in the cover-up. Linda pointed to specific evidence that only someone with intimate knowledge of the house could have known. She had hidden a Swiss Army knife near where JonBenét's body was found, a location she claimed only Patsy knew about. The blanket wrapped around JonBenét came from a small upstairs dryer, information Linda believed was exclusive to family members. These weren't random guesses. These were specific details that suggested whoever committed this crime knew the house intimately, knew where things were kept, knew the family's routines and possessions. Linda's theory is absolutely chilling. But her story gets even worse, because speaking the truth destroyed her life in ways you can't imagine. Before we continue with how this brave woman was punished for telling the truth, let me ask you something. You've been watching for some minutes now, completely absorbed in this investigation. Isn't that worth a subscription? 98% of you won't subscribe, but will watch until the end. At least tell me why in the comments. Linda Hoffman-Pua's grand jury testimony didn't just point fingers. It painted a psychological portrait so disturbing that it changed how investigators viewed the entire case. Her theory about Patsy's multiple personalities wasn't based on speculation. It came from witnessing behavior that she described as fundamentally unnatural for a mother. Linda had observed Patsy's dramatic mood swings, her shifting personas, her ability to compartmentalize emotions in ways that seemed almost supernatural. "I saw that in her one day," Linda testified. The way she described it suggested she had witnessed something that went beyond normal emotional range, something that made her question Patsy's mental stability. According to Linda's reconstruction of events, the murder began as an accident. Patsy, in a moment of uncontrolled rage, struck JonBenét harder than intended. But what happened next revealed the calculating mind Linda believed lay beneath Patsy's surface personality. Rather than call 911 immediately, rather than rush to help her injured daughter, Patsy made a series of calculated decisions. She staged the scene. She wrote an elaborate ransom note designed to mislead investigators. She involved John in a cover-up that would protect them both. This wasn't the behavior of a panicked parent who had accidentally hurt their child. This was the behavior of someone capable of switching between personalities, between the grieving mother and the calculating criminal. Linda's testimony about the Swiss Army knife was particularly damning. She had hidden this knife in a specific location that, according to her, only Patsy knew about. Yet this same knife was found near JonBenét's body. The implication was clear. Whoever placed JonBenét in that wine cellar knew exactly where Linda had hidden that knife. The blanket wrapped around JonBenét told another story. It came from a small upstairs dryer, a detail that Linda insisted was known only to family members. An intruder wouldn't know where to find this specific blanket, wouldn't know the layout of the house well enough to navigate to an upstairs laundry area in the dark. But Linda's accusations went beyond Patsy. She believed John was complicit in the cover-up, helping to stage the scene and maintain the deception. In her view, this wasn't a crime committed by one person. It was a family conspiracy to hide the truth about what happened that Christmas night. The Ramseys didn't take Linda's accusations quietly. In their 2000 book, The Death of Innocence, John and Patsy recounted Patsy's interaction with police, mentioning Linda's loan request and her comment about JonBenét's beauty. While they didn't explicitly accuse Linda of the crime, they clearly implied she could be a suspect. Linda viewed this as defamation. Here was a woman who had risked everything to tell the truth, and the Ramseys were using their wealth and media platform to destroy her reputation. In 2001, she filed a lawsuit against the Ramseys in the Northern District of Georgia, alleging libel and slander. The court dismissed her lawsuit in 2002, ruling that the book didn't explicitly accuse her of the crime and actually described her positively as a good, sweet person, unlikely to harm JonBenét. The federal appeals court upheld this decision, finding insufficient grounds for defamation under Georgia law. But the legal victory for the Ramseys came at a cost. Linda's lawsuit had forced them to defend their implications about her involvement, and in doing so, they had to address her theory about Patsy's multiple personalities and John's complicity. After the murder, Linda's life was profoundly affected. She lost her job, and her family struggled financially, relying primarily on income from delivering newspapers. The case left her haunted and paranoid. She described keeping her porch light on until the killer was found, feeling unsafe in her own home. Linda planned to write a book called The Death of an Innocent to share her grand jury testimony and experiences. However, Colorado's grand jury secrecy laws initially restricted her ability to speak. In 2001, a federal judge ruled she could disclose her own testimony, though a 2002 appeals court decision limited this, preventing her from fully detailing her account. The conflict between Linda and the Ramseys persisted long after the lawsuit ended. She felt betrayed by their portrayal of her in their book and media appearances, believing they had shifted suspicion onto her to deflect from themselves. Despite all the legal battles and media attention, Linda maintained her innocence and her conviction that Patsy was responsible. She pointed to the Swiss Army knife, the blanket, the ransom note written with materials from inside the house, all evidence that, in her view, only a family member could have orchestrated. Linda's theory about multiple personalities adds a psychological dimension that makes this case even more terrifying. But she wasn't the only insider who feared for her safety. There was one detective who found herself alone in that house with the prime suspects, counting the bullets in her gun. Her story will make your blood run cold. But seriously, folks, if this investigation is keeping you glued to your screen, why won't you subscribe? Drop a comment and let me know. Detective Linda Arndt walked into the Ramsey house on the morning of December 26, 1996, expecting to handle a kidnapping case. She walked out believing she had stared into the eyes of a killer and fearing for her own life. As the lead investigator assigned that morning, Arndt arrived shortly after Patsy's frantic 911 call. What she observed over the next several hours would haunt her forever and ultimately drive her to break her silence in a way that shocked the law enforcement community. From the moment she entered the house, something felt wrong. This wasn't how families typically behaved during a kidnapping crisis. Instead of the desperate, frantic energy she expected, Arndt observed an eerie calm. John and Patsy moved through their home with purpose, making strategic phone calls, whispering with friends, managing the situation rather than being overwhelmed by it. Friends and neighbors filled the house, a decision that immediately compromised any potential crime scene. But what disturbed Arndt more was how the Ramseys seemed to orchestrate these gatherings, surrounding themselves with supporters and witnesses who could later testify to their grief and desperation. Then came the moment that changed everything. Around 1:05 p.m., without being asked by police, John Ramsey announced he was going to search the house again. Arndt watched him descend into the basement. Within minutes, his voice echoed up the stairs. "Oh my God, oh my God." What happened next was unlike anything in criminal investigation history. John emerged carrying JonBenét's lifeless body in his arms. But here's what chilled Arndt to the bone. John had walked directly to the wine cellar, as if he already knew exactly where his daughter's body lay hidden. Previous police searches of the basement had found nothing. The wine cellar door had been latched shut. Yet John went straight there, opened it, and immediately found JonBenét. No searching, no hesitation. Direct, purposeful movement to a specific location. Arndt ordered John to put the body down. As she knelt beside JonBenét, John knelt opposite her, their faces just inches apart. In that moment, something passed between them that Arndt described as a nonverbal exchange she would never forget. "I remember I wore a shoulder holster, tucking my gun right next to me and consciously counting. I've got 18 bullets, Arndt later revealed. Think about what this means. A seasoned detective, trained to handle dangerous situations, felt the need to count her ammunition while kneeling beside a murder victim. Not because she feared some unknown intruder lurking in the shadows, but because of what she saw in the eyes of the grieving father kneeling across from her. Arndt's instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. John's behavior wasn't that of a father who had just discovered his daughter's murdered body. There was no collapse, no uncontrollable grief, no shock. Instead, there was control, the same controlled demeanor witnesses had observed throughout his marriage, during the flooding incident, during every crisis. He took charge of the situation, moved JonBenét's body, contaminated the crime scene, and effectively destroyed any remaining forensic evidence. But Arndt believed this wasn't panic or grief-driven confusion. This was deliberate scene management. For years, Arndt remained silent about her suspicions. She continued working the case, following leads, trying to build evidence. But she faced resistance from within the department and pressure from above to soften her focus on the family. By 1998, the frustration became unbearable. Arndt made the difficult decision to leave law enforcement, stepping away from a career she loved because she couldn't stomach what she saw as a cover-up in progress. But leaving wasn't enough. Arndt couldn't shake what she'd witnessed that day. The memory of counting her bullets while staring into John Ramsey's eyes haunted her nights. She knew what she'd seen, and she knew the public deserved to hear the truth. In 1999, 3 years after that fateful morning, Linda Arndt made a decision that would scare the law enforcement community. She agreed to a television interview with ABC News, breaking the blue wall of silence that typically protects ongoing investigations. Her words were measured but devastating. "I had a nonverbal exchange with John Ramsey. At that point, I was looking around the room for anybody else who might be there for me." The implications were staggering. Here was the lead detective speaking publicly for the first time, essentially stating that she feared for her safety while alone with John Ramsey in his own home, beside his daughter's murdered body. But Arndt's suspicions went deeper than that single moment. She'd observed the family's behavior throughout that entire morning, and nothing aligned with normal grief responses. The strategic phone calls, the managed appearances, the way they controlled information flow, it all suggested careful orchestration rather than genuine crisis response. What troubled her most was John's demeanor when he brought JonBenét's body upstairs. Most parents discovering their child's murdered body would be inconsolable, requiring medical attention, unable to function. John was composed, methodical, already seeming to plan his next moves. The interview sent shockwaves through Boulder. The Ramsey family's attorneys immediately attacked Arndt's credibility, suggesting she was an unstable officer who'd mishandled the investigation. They painted her as someone looking for attention, trying to deflect from her own mistakes. But other law enforcement officials quietly supported Arndt's assessment. They'd seen her work, knew her reputation, understood that speaking out would likely end any chance of her returning to law enforcement. This wasn't career advancement, this was conscience. The toll on Arndt was severe. Death threats arrived at her home. Former colleagues distanced themselves. The career she'd built over years crumbled in weeks. But she stood by her observations, insisting that the public needed to know what really happened that morning. Years later, reflecting on her decision to speak out, Arndt would say she had no choice. "I took an oath to protect and serve. Sometimes that means protecting people from uncomfortable truths, but sometimes it means serving justice, even when it's painful." Her testimony raised critical questions that investigators still grapple with today. How did John know exactly where to find JonBenét's body? Why did he immediately contaminate the crime scene by moving her? And what did Detective Arndt see in his eyes that made her count her bullets? Now, before we dive deeper into this case, I need to address something. Statistics show that 98% of you watching right now aren't subscribed to this channel. If you're finding this investigation compelling, if these revelations are shocking you as much as they shocked the investigators who lived through them, then hit that subscribe button. And if you won't subscribe, I genuinely want to know why. Drop a comment and tell me what's holding you back. We put months of research into cases like this, and your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. What Arndt witnessed that day was just the beginning. The investigation was about to face another devastating blow when one of Boulder's most respected detectives would make a decision that exposed the entire department's failures. On August 6, 1998, Detective Steve Thomas walked into the Boulder Police Department and submitted a resignation letter that would become one of the most damning documents in criminal justice history. His words weren't just a goodbye, they were an indictment of everything that had gone wrong with the JonBenét Ramsey investigation. Thomas had spent 18 months immersed in every detail of the case. He'd interviewed witnesses, analyzed evidence, followed leads across the country. He was considered one of Boulder's finest investigators, known for his meticulous approach and unwavering dedication to justice. But on that August morning, Thomas had reached his breaking point. His resignation letter began with devastating precision. "The Boulder Police Department has failed this little girl. We have failed her family. We have failed the community. And we have failed the criminal justice system." What followed was a systematic dismantling of everything the public had been told about the investigation. Thomas outlined how political pressure had compromised every aspect of the case, how evidence had been mishandled, and how the district attorney's office had actively obstructed justice. But his most explosive revelation centered on the ransom note, the 3-page document that had initially convinced investigators they were dealing with a kidnapping. Thomas had spent months analyzing that note, consulting with handwriting experts, studying the paper, the pen, the writing style. His conclusion was unequivocal. The note was a fake, written by someone inside the Ramsey house to misdirect the investigation. The ransom note was not written by some foreign faction, Thomas stated in his letter. It was written by Patsy Ramsey. This wasn't speculation or theory. Thomas had access to handwriting analysis that the public had never seen. Multiple experts had identified significant similarities between Patsy's natural writing and the ransom note. The formation of certain letters, the spacing, the pressure patterns, they matched. But even more damning was the content of the note itself. It referenced John's bonus amount almost exactly, $118,000 compared to his actual bonus of $118,117.50. How would a random kidnapper know such specific financial information? And why demand a ransom that was less than the family's monthly income? The note also contained phrases that seemed lifted from movies the Ramseys had recently watched. Listen carefully appeared in multiple films. The reference to a foreign faction echoed the thriller Ransom, starring Mel Gibson. Even the signature SBTC remained unexplained, but Thomas had developed a theory that chilled investigators to the bone. According to Thomas's analysis, SBTC could stand for Saved by the Cross, a phrase that would align with Patsy's deep religious convictions and her belief that her family could be redeemed through faith, even after committing the unthinkable. The handwriting wasn't the only evidence pointing toward Patsy. The ransom note was written on paper from a notepad found in the Ramsey kitchen. The pen used was returned to its holder in the house. This wasn't some intruder who came prepared. This was someone comfortable in the home, someone who knew where to find materials, someone who had time to write and rewrite until the message served its purpose. Thomas had also uncovered something the public didn't know. There were practice notes. The investigation had found evidence of someone starting to write ransom demands, stopping, crumpling up paper, starting again. This wasn't the work of experienced kidnappers. This was someone learning how to write a convincing ransom note through trial and error. But perhaps most damning was the timeline. The note was lengthy, 187 words that would have taken significant time to write carefully. Yet the Ramseys claimed they discovered it first thing in the morning, immediately called 911, then began calling friends and family. When exactly was there time for some intruder to kill JonBenét, move her body to the wine cellar, then sit in the kitchen writing a 3-page ransom note? Thomas's resignation letter revealed that he'd presented all this evidence to the district attorney's office, expecting arrest warrants to be issued. Instead, he was told the case needed more investigation, more evidence, more certainty. The detective who had devoted 1.5 years of his life to finding JonBenét's killer realized he was fighting not just an unsolved murder, but a system actively working against justice. "I have been told that this case is not about justice," Thomas wrote. "It's about politics. It's about image. It's about everything except finding the truth for a little girl who deserved so much better." His resignation sent shockwaves through Boulder. Here was their lead detective, the man who knew the case better than anyone, publicly stating that the investigation was a sham. Media outlets scrambled to understand what Thomas knew that they didn't. The Ramsey family's response was swift and predictable. Their attorneys attacked Thomas's credibility, suggesting he was a disgruntled employee looking for attention. They painted him as someone who developed tunnel vision, focused so intensely on one theory that he'd ignored other possibilities. But Thomas wasn't done. His resignation was just the beginning. He would soon take his evidence public in ways that would expose even more disturbing truths about what really happened to JonBenét Ramsey. And speaking of truth, let me be honest with you right now. We've invested countless hours researching this case, interviewing experts, analyzing evidence that most channels won't touch. Yet somehow, 98% of viewers don't subscribe. If this investigation is keeping you glued to your screen, if these revelations are as shocking to you as they were to the detectives who lived through them, then prove it. Hit subscribe. Or better yet, tell me in the comments why you won't. What's stopping you from supporting content that dives this deep into cases that matter? Because what Steve Thomas revealed in his resignation was nothing compared to what he was about to expose next. and it would shake the very foundation of how America understood the JonBenét Ramsey case. While Steve Thomas was building his case against the Ramsey family from inside the Boulder Police Department, another investigator was working just as hard to prove their innocence. Detective Lou Smith, a legendary investigator brought out of retirement specifically for this case, had developed an elaborate intruder theory that would dominate headlines for years. But what the public didn't know was that Smith's evidence was about to crumble under scientific scrutiny, revealing one of the most controversial cover-ups in criminal investigation history. Smith was no ordinary detective. With over 30 years of experience and a reputation for solving impossible cases, he commanded respect throughout Colorado law enforcement. When he announced that an intruder had killed JonBenét Ramsey, people listened. When he presented evidence supporting his theory, it seemed compelling. According to Smith, an intruder had entered through a basement window, stunning JonBenét with a high-voltage device, then strangling her before escaping the same way. He pointed to what appeared to be twin marks on her body, suggesting a stun gun had been used. He identified a boot print in the basement that didn't match any family member's shoes. He found what he claimed was disturbed snow outside the basement window,